Hello, everyone. It's a very exciting Wednesday here at the Moira Press because we're here with Ricky, which is always a thrill. But we also were able to get Stormie Grace to come on the show to talk to us about culture and astrology. Now, Stormie, we know who you are, but do you want to tell people you have a big channel? So what do you do mainly on your channel?
Yeah, so it's an astrology channel. That one is, anyways, of course. And so there's lots of horoscopes, there's weekly updates that go on, there's annual updates, but there's also a lot of teaching content that ends up on that channel as well. So if people are just looking to learn at a more introductory, intermediate level, they can go to the channel and grab pieces of content. And I like making teaching videos too about the random things that come up when people are reading, like combustion. What does that mean? And so there's, these quick videos where people can stop in and also get a good explanation for what that is. And then that channel ties into my business channel where I help creative people, astrologers, tarot, whatever their lane is, to build their businesses.
Nice. So yeah, I'm really interested in you on the production side of things because we were talking a little bit online and I was telling you the quote of like there's one female producer for like ni every 97 males or something like that. And so like I'm really impressed with your production level that you do. So you produce younger astrologers?
Well, in what way? Can you say more about that?
Like I saw you were helping out some new astrologer who couldn't get a speaking spot because she didn't have enough online presence or something like that.
In that way, yes, I teach a YouTube class like to help people come online so that they can learn to produce their own content. And what does it even mean to be in the entertainment space? Because I don't really think of it as social media anymore. Think of it as an entertainment space. But what does it mean to come out here? And yeah, I teach people how to do that at a pretty basic level and a good
Yeah,
strategy.
yeah, I'm really interested in how tough you are as far as like you show up a lot and you seem to have no baggage about showing up online. And it's like, did you have to develop that strength? Or, I mean, Ricky's got that toughness too. He just shows right up. He's just, you know, but he's like super famous. So,
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Maybe it is having a mercurial chart. Maybe that makes it easier. I don't know, but I did come from before I was working online. I was working in radio and I was doing radio at the time that radio was pretty visible. So actually, I'm thinking about that further than that. It just does not bother me to be in public. It just really does not bother me to be in public. So then it was about what is the strategy and how do you make it work in a way that information can be given and received. Just more honing it, I think.
interesting. So then tell us a little bit about, sorry, Ricky, to make you sit there for so long, but
No, no, I'm enjoying it. Please
okay,
keep
cool.
going.
We are entertaining Ricky. Okay, so how long have you been an astrologer and what kind of readings do you do?
Sure. So I've been an astrologer, practicing professional astrologer since 2014, and I'm a mix between evolutionary and humanistic astrology. And so I created my own little brand called Astrofluency. And really, it comes from the space of in the evolutionary space, looking at the soul story. Where did you come from? What's maybe the baggage that's coming in from behind, and what are you working at that spiritual level? But then in the humanistic lens, it's like, okay, but you're a human this time. What are you going to do about that? Like, what are some practical strategies you can take to navigate the soul story? So it becomes this combination of both of them. And that's what people get in my consultations. And I have my own steps and technique that I follow and walk through a chart and get people, teach it to people so that they can speak. That's what I want in terms of astrofluencies. I want people to be able to speak their journey and speak their life and speak what they're witnessing through the language of astrology.
Yeah. Is Stephen Forrest one of your teachers?
Stephen Forrest, and then the Till line, Kathy Rose. I love her.
Because Stephen is one of your teachers, right, Ricky?
Hmm. Yeah.
So you all didn't meet through that, through Stephen?
No,
No.
we just met like we haven't officially met. Like this is it. This is us meeting.
Whoa. Well, all right.
Good
Okay.
day.
Well, okay. So let's really meet you now, because now we're going to dig into the actual topic of our show, which is intersections of culture or race in astrology. So, now, how do you look at intersections of race and astrology when you're doing readings? Like, do you consider the ethnicity of your client in a reading, and if so, how?
I think that's a bit of a tricky question because it's the yes, no, right? Like I'm not colorblind. I can look at someone and see if they are a different shade than I am, right? And that comes with a natural set of thought processes, biases, understandings, check, that come into play. But what happens for me is that I get to sit with who's in front of me and let them pour out their story to me and pour out their experience to me. My job is to use the astrology to look at what are the symbols saying, what's the fluency that's happening in this chart, and then the texture and the sentiment behind those things, and maybe the way that it shaped the strategy that they're using. They tell me. I let them tell me. It's not my job to tell them you are this, this, and this, so this. How do I know that? I have no idea about any of that. But this idea that it's like, I'm not going to be able to sit in front of someone who is potentially different than me or coming as they are and not make some kind of assessment. I'm a human being and a Virgo rising, so there's some discernment that comes in, but I can't put that on people. And I think a really great example that I have is I have a client that I've worked with for a very long time, lovely Black woman, older Black woman. And if I had taken the thought process of, okay, here's this Black woman, here's the things I think that go with that, right? I would have missed out on her completely. She's like, no, most Black women actually don't like me. I'm not very attached to the Black community. Here's my experience. Here's where I grew up, right? So in this way, there's no way I think to not consider the way that culture and ethnicity do intersect, but it's not for me to put it on someone else and make that their story.
Hmm. Ricky, any thoughts on that?
Oh, that's cool. That sounds awesome.
So what I'm hearing you say, Stormy, is that you might listen for cultural information as you're uncovering someone's chart and story. You might say, "Oh, this is an African American woman who doesn't necessarily vibe with the Black community. Okay, that's a piece of her puzzle as a human." Because in some ways, astrology is identity politics, where we're looking at a person and all these things about them, right? So you're listening to that, but you're not going to tell someone in a reading like, "Oh, because you're this and your ethnicity is this," then so you might listen for that, but you're not going to make that content yourself.
Exactly. And that comes further from a lot of the way early readings looked for me is that, first of all, people were coming to me and they were getting audio recorded readings from me. They were sending me information. I never saw them. I never saw them. I was put in a position to only use the astrology to talk about what was going on, what was I seeing. And I think that that was a great training camp for me too, to not have anything to put on someone. You know what I mean? To just let that process kind of naturally unfold itself.
Yeah, I agree, but I don't think we're talking about putting anything on people. I think more we're referring to race, ethnicity, gender as being part of someone's soul journey. Because we can say the soul, but the soul has to take on some kind of vehicle to have that journey, and it becomes at least the biggest hurdle in getting to the soul, I believe.
I don't disagree with that at all. I still, in the terms of which one of these elements of the vehicle are carrying the weight of the story, I still have to wait for the client to reveal that to me. I
Yeah.
have clients that are trans, and if they hadn't told me, I'd have never known. So it's not, you know what I mean? I can't put it there.
Yeah, and again, that's not what we're talking about. Typically, when we start talking about race or gender, it's like what we've noted, or what I've noticed, is like the defenses come up because it's so taboo, and I don't think you can do any kind of astrology putting anyone in any kind of box. I think the way you described it is extremely articulate and beautiful. Um, but considering how someone is presenting, especially as an adult, and thinking how much of their race, culture, gender, etc., contributed to how they're showing up, trans, anything, right?
Mhm.
How we in life, it's obvious. You see someone, and even unconsciously, your mind starts making that click, 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 right?
1,000%.
And so just making sure, like what I'm proposing is just making sure that, and you already said it, is present in the room because it's part of the story.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it usually comes up, and I don't have a lot of one-off clients, right? So I typically have time to be with my clients for years. And the story of the race, of the culture, of the belief structure, of the religion comes up. And that becomes a more rich place for us to have that conversation as it presents its help or its hurdle. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm with you in that regard as well.
Or I mean, something as simple as a woman with a very powerful, prominent Mars.
Hmm.
You know, just in at least in our culture, and more so in certain places. Of course, unless someone's dad was a football coach or etc. But just generally generalizing, that's something that I won't say, oh, blah blah blah, but it's something that I might bring up early in the conversation. And I'll own it. I'll say my experience, right,
Hmm.
is women that have strong Mars is right that there's just based on culture, there's obstacles to finding ways to express that in ways that feel good.
I see the sentiment, and we probably are saying the same thing differently. But even if I saw a woman with a really strong Mars, I'm going to wait for a minute and we're going to talk about my experience in the astrological signature of what kind of energy does this carry, right? But another thing I talk about with my clients as well is I talk about the spectrum of what could this be like? And then my question is, this is my experience. What's your experience of how this shows up in your life? And by then, we're getting more deeply into, oh, here's how I'm using this or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think Ricky and I are doing some activism in our show where we are being a little pushy as to say, can we look at intersections of culture and astrology a little bit more closely? Like we're kind of trying to push the younger generations and the older generations because in Ptolemy, in the Tetrabiblos, Ptolemy looked at four influences on a growing creature: culture, climate, wait, genetics, culture, climate in the chart, right? So Ptolemy would include genetics in because he's looking at a growing creature. Like this astrology was the development theory of a growing creature. So the genetic makeup of the plant or the human is part of the analysis according to Ptolemy, right? So like, are you genetically African or are you genetically Caucasian is part of the analysis according to this ancient book, right? I'm not saying he's right because he's ancient, but I think we're challenging people to say, like, how does that Mars in, let's say it's Mars in Gemini. Okay, how would a Mars in Gemini express differently in a chart of an African American person or a chart of a white person? And why is that important? And so we're kind of pushing people to think about it. It's not like we expect you to have thought about it necessarily.
Sure, but I think it's a good thing, and I think it is good to push this and to push the conversation. The place that I find further exploration is why does it have to express differently? What is the overarching assumption that if the person is black or is white, that Mars is going to express differently? And how can we put that presumption on people without being with the people, right? Like you will tell me if you are a Black woman who came from a particular place in the world, you're going to tell me how that Mars is expressing. But wouldn't it be interesting if your white neighbor told me the same thing? So that is the place that I have pushback is like, where is it in the cultural conversations that we are trying to make things be different immediately before we allow there to be space for the difference to be presented?
Well, that's beautiful. And I think my point, at least, is more about looking at the astrology of culture and the astrology of race. Is I think it's fair to say that certain cultures carry certain astrological archetypes more predominantly. And I think if someone is asking a bigger question about a simple question like the role of women in the world,
Mhm.
and then I've been reflecting on it and thinking about the different astrological ages. All right. This has been on my mind a lot and thinking about the moon is exalted in, according to astrologers, the moon is exalted in the sign of Taurus. And if you look at the role of women on the planet during the age of Taurus, it's distinctly different from the role of women during the age of Aries. Distinctly different. And the difference feels like Taurus and Aries. And thinking further, as I feel like everyone is still healing from the moon, from women during the age of Aries. And I think if someone goes through war, you go through a big fight, sometimes it takes a minute to feel safe enough, right,
Absolutely.
to interact with something. And so I agree. I don't want to put anything on anyone, but this deeper reflection of, because we just don't tend to look at it. just this deeper reflection of not that it's different, but how it's different. Because difference equals difference, right? It's
Mhm.
like you can step in the same river twice, is that we're all unique in many different ways. And astrology can give tremendous insight on the nuance of those differences. And the point for me is it helps us appreciate those things.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a really good example, this has been on my mind kind of to speak to what you're talking about, hopefully. Um, Watching all of the rest of the outer planets, which I call the professor planets, now come into masculine signs. One of the things that I started to sense, just even as Pluto came into Aquarius, right? There was this sentiment and there was this reaction for me personally, and then I watched it for other feminine energies around me, where it was almost like feminine energy kind of got put back into its, in quotes, natural place, right? Where it needed to become receptive again. And once all of the outer planets came into masculine container, I hear more from women. I want to be easy. I need to be softer. I need to play more. I don't want to do that as much. And while that could happen in a masculine form, I got so many quotes around here, right?
Yeah,
I'm
right.
not hearing it in that group the way that I'm hearing it in the form that is biologically feminine. And that includes my trans clients who were biologically feminine. And so it is interesting. I think that you're bang on. There are these ages and these times and these changes of energy where we have to consider how is that shaping it. And that's very much so a part of my work right now. But I still also have to have that one step back conversation to let someone lead me into
Yeah.
who they are, how they're experiencing it. But then it does come around.
Well, yeah, like you said, I mean, that's a humanistic perspective. It's beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. And again, I have ninth house Gemini sun. It's just my mind tends to go like bigger, right? Like just these deeper questions of what does it mean to be in a biologically male body? What does it mean to be born
Yeah,
with more pigment? And like what is the deeper significance around the movement of so many Africans to the United States? Right? Because
absolutely.
and I wouldn't even call it mundane astrology. It's I just have this deep question of where does it all come from? Because
Mhm.
my practice of astrology is compelled me to believe in an orderly universe.
Um,
You know?
yes.
Well, and I think
Listen,
in some ways we have to teach people what we're doing. I mean, okay, so I wanted to speak to the fact that Stormie is doing what I think is very healing about astrology. Like there's a certain container that happens in a reading where we can suspend, like we can look at the soul regardless of race and all these other identity constructs that people put on in the everyday world. So we can look at you beyond your race and say like, well, I'm looking at your Mars and Gemini and it's like it's beyond race. And that's a beautiful thing about astrology. And so we're kind of doing this weaving thing of saying, now what happens if we then also included
yeah.
this race level? Does that complicate things in a way that ruins that beautiful soul piece? Or does it become richer and does it become more I don't know. It's a tender line we're walking of like teaching, making this more identity political, but in doing so, maybe we're like, here's an example. Okay, let's say we have an extremely violent chart, like it's a Mars Pluto moon conjunction in Scorpio in the first house,
Mhm.
and that's inhabited by a white male versus a black male. Which one is safer culturally to
Mhm.
inhabit that chart? I mean, that's one of the questions we keep asking.
No, I think that they're great questions. I like totally want to speak to this. And it's like, yes, in the very evolutionary way, we come in, we have the soul conversation, everything's stripped away. Magic, love it for us. We have to come to the nuance of the humanistic. That's where I lost a little touch with evolutionary because I'm like, we have to bring in the human capacity, right? And so then we layer in the nuance. Okay, this is the soul's journey. And as a Black man who has these placements, what are we doing with that? And this is where I think, essentially we might be saying the same thing. However, I want to speak to something you said. So they have the Mars, Pluto, moon in the first. Why innately is that a violent chart?
Well, I would say innately because from the way that I do astrology, Mars is the aggressive urge. And one
Right.
of the things I point out to a lot of people is I don't believe that a chart can describe a person. I think it can describe a person's life. And so if Mars is powerful in someone's chart, As Stephen would say, there's going to be more than the average person situations where you have to decide, are you going to be the hunter or the prey? And so it can manifest a lot of different ways. And I also, the way I conceptualize the planets is they attract experiences.
Yeah.
And those experiences are attracted based on our environment, right? We can't attract them if we're around a lot of guns and knives and we're going through a lot of Mars stuff, right? That the guns and the knives become more alive for us in that environment. So when I think of race, culture, gender, I think of those as part of the environment that the soul is expressing through. And another little piece is, for me, the body, the vehicle that we chose to manifest in is part of the evolutionary journey, because
Yeah.
there are certain experiences that men can have that women can't, and vice versa. There are certain experiences that white people can have that it's kind of hard for black people to have, at least in America, right? And vice versa. So I think there's something evolutionary about the vehicle and the kinds of experiences that we are attracting.
I so am with you because that's it. It's like, you know what? If in the soul story, from the belief of the evolutionary perspective, you needed to learn fill in the blank things.
Yeah.
Okay, being a white 50-year-old woman might not have done it, or
Yeah.
being a Spanish 30-year-old man might not have done it. So you picked the vehicle. I'm with you, like all the way. And I think that it is important when we do layer that bigger nuance in there. The
Yeah.
thing I think is the neutral piece that I come from, no matter what, is that I just don't innately think any placement means anything, except that there's going to be a contained amount of energy that comes from each of these experiences that those planets are going to call into you. But I need you to come to the table and start talking to me about how it's showing up. What's the current manifestation? Because that's the other thing about a reading. Nobody comes to me because it's going well. They're not like, you know what, I was out there living my best life and I thought I would drop some money and come hang out with you. Nobody has ever done that. Not in my experience. They're coming because probably a piece of the strategy to play out that soul story is stuck. And we're going to have a different kind of look at it. So, yeah, we got to be like, oh, okay. Well, are you, a 6'2" black man and you're trying to live like a 4'2" Italian lady? Like we gotta get this together.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, Ricky's probably sick of me asking guests the same question, but it's like in some ways, in order to get to know our guest, we have to ask this simple question first of just like, do you consider these things yet? And it's like that's just me, like us getting to know you a little bit about like how have you looked at things so far. I mean, in some ways, I'm like a moon Mars Pluto to me is inherently has the genetic potential. If the chart is genetic, if it's a genesis, it has the genetic potential to get more aggravated than a chart without a moon Mars Pluto, right? So it's like if we take the ability and the freedom for people to get aggravated, it's like I feel like we could say culturally some people have like, okay, let's take it out of like African American and white. Let's take like a small Asian man with, or an Asian woman with a moon Mars Pluto and Scorpio. Like I feel like if people are less intimidated by that culture, it's like they would think like, what are you going to get angry and like hack my computer or something? No, no, okay, I'm not stereotyping to be inflammatory. I'm just, doing it to make a point here of like, I feel like people have certain associations with certain cultures as being kind of scarier or, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And that way they don't have as much leeway to try out their energies. And that's kind of messed up.
No, I totally agree. And I think that's why I like my approach. I'm like, let's be in the position of neutral, and then we'll see which direction we're going to drive. We either drive on forward or be in reverse. I have plenty of clients too who come out of India and want the experience of Western astrology. Listen, I have a whole set of ideas. And in fact, they have a very old culture and religion that gave us across the world a lot of idea about what that is. And in the space of becoming my client, they have the opportunity to be what the chart is. What's your chart?
Mhm.
Let's have that experience first. And then, eventually the Mars, Pluto, Moon shows up, and I'm like, all right, friends.
Yeah. I'm over here trying to keep people out of jail. I'm always like pouncing on the person, bloodletting them, and everyone, all the psychological astrologers like, it's okay. I'm like, no, it's not okay. Okay, sorry.
But that's the experience, right? Like you needed the like, I'm trying to stay out of jail. I'm trying to keep you out of jail experience. And I'm like, let's just calm the fuck down.
I'm
Let's
like,
just
you need to see
move on.
Stormie and calm the frick down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think another piece that I think more personal is that the way that we look at a chart, the way we look at the world, the way that we approach astrology is based on our own experiences.
1000%.
And an example, and I'm picking it up heavy from this conversation, is that having this. Hold on one second, little one.
There's something I was going to ask you. So, do you think that you being of a certain culture affects your astrological walk? Like, do you think it would be different if you were a different culture?
Absolutely. I absolutely do. I don't think that there would be an ability for that not to change my, at least the influences to my practice, right? Would it change the way that my heart wants to work in astrology and the way that my mind sees it blend together the way that I've created it? Maybe not. I'm not sure. But would the culture around me? Yeah, it definitely would. If I came from a Vedic practitioner, right? Like a Vedic culture, absolutely I would have a different set of mind frames and history behind me. If I came from any of those things are going to absolutely impact the story. I do believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I was saying, it's just in this conversation of, I've met more Caucasian white astrologers than I have African American astrologers, but and one of the things I can say, generally speaking, is it feels more like rooted to actual experience. This conversation, I find so many astrologers, it's so conceptual, and I think it has to be conceptual because that's how we learn. Typically, is through the books, but there's something about the lived experience having to check out that I'm really appreciating about this conversation.
Well,
Oh,
actually,
yeah.
that's a theoretic, Ricky. So in development or learning, there's something called hypersymbolic, and then it goes down, and then there's like I can't remember there's like four layers, and then concrete is like the lowest layer. And if you're teaching somebody something hypersymbolic, which astrology is, you have to go down to the concrete layer and then go back up to symbolic for them to understand that symbolic layer at all. And that's exactly what this show does. It's like, yeah, we got this chart, but on the real life, it means you went through that Mars transit and then you got mad and then the cops jumped on you, like, or whatever. I mean, that's an extreme example, but that's actually part of learning symbolic information. And so I think this show is kind of helpful in rooting astrology in reality of like, what does this really look like?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean more specifically, like when I was in school and they were talking about certain concepts. I'm kind of talking about air now. Certain concepts like freedom, and then in history, thinking freedom and how things are supposed to be. And being African American male, it was easy in my experience, it was easy for me to see that those concepts don't actually check out in reality. You know,
mhm.
sometimes my wife, who's white, sometimes I'm talking to her, and it's like she's never had that experience of these concepts not checking out in reality because of her experiences.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, when I again with astrology, concepts are great and they help connect the dots. But it wasn't until I acquired the fluency. But the fluency is from checking reality against what the books say.
Yeah. I mean, I have zero to debate that at all. I mean, that's exactly my experience, but I do try to, in life in general, just speak from my experience because my opinion on a whole number of anything doesn't really matter and it's not very useful. It's what I think. And sometimes at moments, an ounce of my discernment in a snap situation may be useful, but other than that, I can only speak from my experience. That's the only thing I have credible space to speak from. So it's probably the other reason why it's easier for me to shut up as well, because I'm like, I haven't lived your life. Let's talk about your life. And as you share your life with me, then I can help dig into my own experiences, dig into the astrological experiences, ask questions about your experience. So it becomes fully experiential because the rest is opinion to me. And that is a great way to do damage.
Spoken like a true Mercury Gemini person.
I'm also Taurus in the ninth house. So, I'm just
Yeah,
trying to be cool. I'm just trying to keep it cool.
yeah, doing a good job.
What does Steven say? He's like, the evolutionary goal of a Taurus is to calm down. I'm like, I'm working on it.
You do seem a lot calmer than me or Ricky. Okay, so another question, this is moving to a little different side of the equation of what you do, is in your channel, do you consider DEI, like diversity and inclusion and all those things, in the programming of your channel?
Yes, no. Oh, I have a stellium in Libra. So no, but yes, because I just create astrology content for people who want to have astrology content. That's it. That's it. There's no like, I think that DEI itself at this point in the world has become a very divisive term, and it does nothing but kick up defenses in people or kick up drama. But the idea, I'm like, listen, I am a person who my experience is traveling across the world, coming from multiple cultures, loving being in multiple cultures, loving seeing different people and hearing their stories. So the content that I create is going to say, okay, how could this apply vastly widely? Right. And the other thing that I'm very clear on my channel, no matter what, is I'm like, this is a general reading. And unless somebody is pulling your chart up on YouTube, you are going to get a general reading from all of us. So consider what you're hearing. You are hearing a general reading through the lens of me and my experience and my technique. Take that for what you will. If you need more inclusivity, we need a personal reading. We need time to know your story. So that's why I say it's like it's the yes and the no. Because for me, quite naturally, letting people come to the content and be like, this is cool for me to listen to. I'm not excluded without having to be like, oh, you're also included is the goal. I'm like, there should be no need for that to me.
Well, so Ricky, what do you think? Do you think Stormie's channel should include like, should it have forced diversity, or should it just be like whatever astrological content is available? You know what I'm saying? Like, what do we think about that idea of like, should we be um, curating diversity, or should we just do whatever is organic?
I'm sorry. I know this is a Ricky question, but I got to jump in. This is the deal. This is the deal. It's the forced whatever. So this is why I think DEI gets a bad rap, because when you're in a space where DEI in quotes is already present, you don't need to do anything to mess with it. It's just happening. People are mixing and mingling. It's when there's an idea of what DEI should look like and we start forcing that's where I come to issue with it. Because other than that, you don't need to do that. I have a great community of multi-language speaking, culturally different people, and I've never had to use that phrase, not once ever.
Well, I think we could say certain people, certain cultures, certain charts are just naturally more inclusive. And I think someone with a lot of strong ninth house energy, right, or a lot of Gemini, that the expression of the chart attracts diverse experiences.
Sure.
And we can either welcome them or we can fight against them. And which I think it comes back to the interaction between the potential of the soul and the external environment, be it body, race, other people, land, etc. And I think what I do is I call it narrative therapy. It's how do we tell a story that allows those two things to exist in some meaningful way.
Mm.
I've been thinking about this a lot, is belief systems. It's because I see astrology as a language, but the language is only as useful as the beliefs behind it. This is the principles that tie the words and the concepts together.
Which is, I think, an interesting thought. I was thinking about this when I was writing my book over this last couple of years. And it's an aspect book. It's to help people with astrofluency, to get people to speak. I want you to speak that aspect, because that is the place I see people get hung up the most, is they know it, it's in here, they've come from great teachers, and then it's time to get it out of their mouth. And it's like, blah, you know? And I thought about that and I was like, does this come from a belief system? Where does the belief system play in? And I realized in writing that book and giving it to absolute non-astro people, that besides not fully knowing the symbols and having to use the book and then like use a little chart that I gave them and they didn't know anything about it, the belief system doesn't matter fluency in astrology can happen as easily as learning Spanish or Italian or any other language. The words are the words. Now, the conviction and the nuance and the sexy or the treacherous that come behind it, I think that's where there's a little bit more texture. But I did learn that a person could learn, okay, if the sun and the moon are in what we call a conjunction, what does that mean and how would they say it? I learned that this last 2 years, and I'm like, it is a language and it can be taken for the words themselves, but where do we, when I go out of my door in Spain and I'm speaking to people, if I said hola, they'd be like, what is that? That's weird. Why are you being weird? But it's when I get into the juicy of it, the conversation and relationship gets deeper, I think.
So I want
Yeah,
to circle. Okay.
I think that what I'm speaking about, the belief system, I think it's deeper, it's subtler than that. Because if you take different types of astrology, for example, and you talk about the sun and a sign, that a great example is evolutionary astrology.
Mhm.
When I hear most people talk about astrology, they use it and they use this, you are a Gemini. And for me, that doesn't resonate.
Yeah,
Not that I don't have Gemini qualities, but the idea that someone is defined as one planet in a sign, but even that behind that is a belief system, and
sure.
and so and
Hmm.
the first astrology that I was introduced to is Vedic astrology, and it's deeply rooted in a belief system. I mean, you go to India and there's temples for each of the planets,
Yeah.
so a different orientation to the planets, like deities.
Hmm.
And it's in the history. I mean, for God's sake, they're named after the gods.
Yeah.
And if someone approached astrology from that perspective, it's a completely different type of astrology. Like even the symbols, they're similar, but they're saying something different. And it's not similar enough to use the word nuance, but they're similar enough, but they're saying different things, and the impact and the consequences of what they're saying extremely different. For
Hmm.
the way I look at astrology, the idea of I don't like Saturn or I don't like my Saturn, it doesn't even compute.
Yeah. Not for me either.
So what you're saying, Ricky, is that the way that we even understand astrology at all is mired in the belief system in which we've grown up in. That you can't actually, extract astrology from belief system because, if you grow up with a Christian belief, you're going to have a different experience. Like maybe when they say like the enemy is against me, you're like, oh, that is for sure Mars. Like, or like, but if you're in, a Babylonian culture, they're going to have a different set of deities and all this stuff. And so that's going to explain your astrology differently. So I think that is such a good point to take with us, which is that we have to look at culture in order to even understand the astrology of that we're looking at.
I
Or
think
the
we have to appreciate culture. I mean,
Yeah.
it's more of something that we have to appreciate of that as the energies are attempting to express into the world, that what they're having to pass through is a person's past experiences, which are very much tied to the home that they grew up in and what was the norm in that environment.
Yeah, I like the way that you've said that. I think that's so beautiful. I think we have to appreciate it. Like any of these things, I think we do have to have the appreciation and the acknowledge of how they shape and form the way that we're practicing and the way that people are experiencing it for sure. Because it's an incomplete story without looking at the fullness of the context that we're presented with, you know? And there's, depending on the kind of astrology you do, there's also a belief system there. Because I know some people who they are not on board with the evolutionary astrology train at all, right? At all. And that's okay. And there's a belief system that's active there, paired with the appreciation of everything else that comes from their life story.
Yeah.
yeah, like you have to be a reincarnationist to really believe in evolutionary.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe
Well,
that.
okay. Stormy, I want to circle back to the point that you made, which is that from the DEI question, because we are doing some activism here, which is, do we need to push diversity in astrology or can we just let it go naturally or whatever? But I like what you're saying, which is, let's say it's a certain page or a certain event in astrology, if it's naturally inclusive of several communities, because of whoever's running it. You know, it's like it sounds like you have a diversity just amongst yourself and your life, and you are a diverse entity kind of thing. So you didn't really have to consider DEI because that's just inherent to your chart. But if somebody is kind of like super white like person or super, I guess if they were Vedic and they only had Vedic astrologers on it, I mean, if there was somebody who was just like very siloed in their, you know, community, that then we might have to go in and consider if we're getting kind of big, we might have to say you might need a little diversity in here to really balance out that equation. I mean, would you go in and mess with that, or would you just let it be what it is?
No, I wouldn't, because for several reasons. One, right? Like, okay, from a business perspective, first of all, I would ask and I would look very strategically at like, who are your clients and who is this targeted to? On my YouTube page, it's very general. Here's what I do, here's my strategy, but it's very general, it's very open, right? But in my business itself, I primarily work with women in a certain demographic. Do you know what I mean? And so if somebody is practicing and they are aiming their business or their practice at a particular demographic that is their niche, I'm for sure not going to say this needs to be different. I'm for sure not, right? Like that's who you're helping, that's who you're practicing with, that's good to go. But the other side of that, I think for me is like, how would we know? How would we know? Like, how would you say? I don't even know how we would begin to do that to say your practice is to this and needs to be this. First of all, it's to this. What does that mean? And it needs to be this. Why does it need to be this? Now, if there are bigger functions, things like NORWAC, UAC, these kinds of things, making sure that they stay as neutrally and open to all people, all kinds of practices and things like that, those would be measures I think are useful to take to make sure that they are genuinely serving the wide astrological community. But I think it's a bit hard to go in and force what I think is a right idea for someone's practice, if that makes sense. And if they need more diversity, that chart is going to crack open and unfold, and some diversity will find them.
Yeah,
Diversity will find you, friends. Whatever
I,
that means.
I think a diversity in I think the ultimate aim for me of diversity is more about the health and the evolution of astrology.
Mhm.
Because in any kind of evolution, in order to promote health, diversity, right? In certain cultures, you weren't allowed to marry anyone in your clan because they appreciated the value of diversity.
Yeah.
An example is, you know, there's not a whole lot of retired professional football players that are studying astrology or practicing astrology. And so I bring a very extremely diverse perspective to astrology. And I think that what's important to me is that it feels safe for people that are outside of the conventional norm, that they feel safe to join the group and be part of the larger community.
Sure. I think, and this very much so could be me because of how I am. I'm not sure what the conventional norm is anymore. I have two children. One is getting ready to be 22, the other one is going to be 18, right? And their generation is just different. They have a barista, an astrologer, and a therapist, like on speed dial. Okay, I didn't have that. So this is a generation when we talk about like what is the conventional norm, I don't even honestly know what that is anymore. I
It's the
think,
thing we all push up against.
but what is that? I'll just share an experience, right?
Yeah.
When I was in school, particularly coming through high school and through college, young Black woman, blah, 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 all the things that go with that story in a stereotypical scenario. There were a whole bunch of things I was told that I couldn't do, and I went on ahead and did them. And it's not because I tried, I just did them. Right? I started an astrological practice crying, by the way. I just want to put that out there. I was scared to death. I started being a YouTuber and coming out online, and I wasn't supposed to be able to do that with two children and going to school and doing all of this. And I just went on ahead and did it, you know? So, like, as soon as I did it, then all this online stuff comes, and then that's the new norm that we bump up against. But it had nothing to do necessarily to do with like my race or my gender or any of these things. So I'm like, well, what is the thing that we bump up against in astrology besides ourselves over and over and over again?
Dogma is what I call it.
Can you say more? Can you say more about it? Because I really am curious. I think I'm asking genuinely from a place of your potentially longer in the astro space experience.
Just, I mean, what I notice is dogma. Right? Like the idea of what does the sun in a certain sign mean? What does the sun mean? Right?
Mm. Hmm.
The way I explain it to my students, like most of what I read, I describe as the branches, right? The manifestations of what people have noticed from certain astrological configurations. And what I'm always seeking for is the root. Where does it come
Hmm.
from? And that's why I can recognize it as dogma. It's because I see all the branches. You know, I tell my students, you know, the branch will be steady sometimes, and sometimes you'll hear it crack and you'll fall you'll fall on your butt. But that's how you learn that this branch isn't steady. I need to go closer to the root.
Yeah. Okay.
And even the study, right? The history of astrology, the first astrologers were observers of what was going on. They weren't reading books. You know,
Hmm.
they were observing what was going on and they were taking copious notes of this is what Venus rose at this time, and this is what was going on in the government, right? 1,500 years of copious notes. And now we have access to so much technology that we could be doing that much to a much greater extent. But instead of watching what's going on, we tend to watch books and repeat what other people have written in those books.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you
so
for, oh, sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off, Andrea. Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, I'm just trying to get the. I'm trying to let you guys talk until you're done, and then ask another question, but I miscalculated. Well, so okay, so I think I really like that we covered that kind of like what to do. Should we push diversity or not? That's a really good little investigation there. Now, what if, okay, let's say you have somebody of a different culture in your class, right? Like Ricky, I know you teach classes and things. Stormy, do you teach classes? Oh yeah, you do. I saw something online about your classes. Okay. So let's say you had somebody of, let's say various cultures in your class. Does that change how you teach the content, or would you just teach the same no matter who's in there?
I teach the same no matter who's in there. For me, it is not only on brand, but it's on heart that no matter what I'm saying and it is coming out of my mouth, it can be acceptable and have nobody can have issue with it unless they have an issue with me or they have an issue with themselves. Pretty much anything else I'm putting out should be pretty neutrally accepted, right? And that's important to me. But again, from there, in my classes, in my courses, as we're experiencing or as we're going through charts, I'm going to do the astrological side because that's the technique through the lens and the technique that I have. And then I always let that person explain their chart or their experience with what we've talked about. It's again, for me, there's no painting on it of, oh, okay, this person is from India or this person is from, Colombia. So it means these things in every capacity. I just don't practice that way. I don't, for me, I don't see the value of it. But I can say there's another astrologer, and her demographic specifically that she chooses to work with are Black women over the age of 40, right? So in her classes, content is very curated to that story, that narrative, potentially ideas that are coming through there. And I think it's done brilliantly, but she's also not exclusive, or to people that are not. It's just very, this is what I know, this is my experience, so this is who I'm prepared to help. So in that way, it's kind of interesting to say, well, where do we celebrate diversity and where do we actually just get it together and build businesses that are specific to whom we help without doing harm?
How about you, Ricky?
Yeah, well, I've noticed not so much culture, but gender, and because I think
Mhm.
unlike most astrologers, like I work with a lot of men and I work with a lot of women, and so it's easy for me to see the difference.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I know that certain things I would say, right, in a way that it might be harder to get into one person, where if I said it a different way, it might be easier to get. And so
Yeah.
it's not that I change, but I'm super, super aware and super conscious of gender and race in culture because I just noticed it. I noticed the differences, and also it's belief systems too, which is woven in there. And my awareness is like I can feel myself saying something, and I can sense where it connects, and I can sense when it doesn't. And so I'm just gathering information about those nuances, and they automatically change the way that I communicate and the way I think about the information.
Yeah. I just want to like totally agree with you there too, because I work primarily with a lot of women and I have a couple male clients and it is a completely different experience. It just is. And when I have my trans clients, it's a completely different experience. But interestingly enough, one of the things, and so I've had permission to work with them, and this will turn into a talk eventually, but working with my trans clients, right? So let's say that I'm working with a trans man as I talk about some of these feminine principles and the changes that are happening and things we're experiencing energetically through my perspective, they confirm, right? So there is something to talking about the yin yang energy of our planets and how do we do that. But in the end, as well, exactly like you're saying, Ricky, I got to sit with the person in front of me and see where our language is connecting. And that's, I love those Mercury placements of my chart because I'm quick to flip. I'm like, oh, we're not getting
Yeah.
communication is not being given or received. That's what I'm here to do is to be with this soul, this person, and make sure it's given and received. And we pivot where we need to, but I do think that those ones at the moment can be challenging because Pluto and Aquarius, how much do we widen our language around some things and what is nature and what's not? And I think that that's in the great ebb and flow right now for us to all play with and kind of experience. What is that? Because, like, it's so funny we're talking about this, but I was talking to a trans client, and he said, yeah, but everything that you're saying, I'm just naturally experiencing. And I was like, do you have all of your feminine biological parts? Yes, I do. Probably why, in my mind, in this conception at this time. And I could be completely wrong. Listen, I could be full of horse toads,
Yeah.
but staying curious, staying to the investigation of how language is reshaping and what does it mean and how does it fit. And some days, I'm going to tell you quite honestly, some days I get so tired. I'm like, why are we chasing this wheel down? Like, did anybody do their laundry today? Like, are we back to basics? Did you do the laundry? Like, I don't know if we need to know if the sun really means that, but just do the dishes.
I mean, listen to you guys. It's like I think I'm a little bit more of a push teacher. I have a Sun, Mercury square Mars, and so it's like I'm a little bit more like if I had let's say I had a trans student who's out and trans, right? I might use more examples that were trans focused or queer focused in my examples in the class. I may be like, oh, one time I had a chart that was like, if the person was out and proud about being trans and it was like a transparent thing. If I had students of different cultures, I might use more multicultural examples in my teaching. So I think there's that. I think we're dealing with a little bit of a style thing here of do we just let the astrology wash over and be on the soul level purely and be kind of neutral, or do we like push this issue and like what is the balance there? And I think it's just interesting to see your different style than you know these I
Sure.
would have.
The thing I run into with it is that I'm like, and I love that Stephen Forrest says this. He was like, astrology is a technical skill. It's a technical skill, right? And I love that. That is the one statement that has stayed with me forever. Yes, my intuition may play in, my culture, my all of these things, but in an astrological reading, in the evolutionary way that he teaches, astrology is a technical skill, and I should be able to do that skill. Anything else that comes behind the skill itself, I have to question, why am I forcing it? Like, what is it that this is lighting up in my chart that is making it so I have to make this look this way for me to be okay or for it to be okay? Which is why I leave a lot of space for lots of different examples, right? Like examples from all over. And then give the life of that person, if we used a celebrity chart, or the life of the person if they're in class, the opportunity to speak to it,
Mhm.
right? That's the space for me because anything else, like, oh, I've seen some charts. I saw a chart once and I was like, these people are all going to die. And I didn't say that out loud. Thank you very much. God help me. And I was talking to Kathy Rose, as a matter of fact. She was like, let's step back. What's going on for you? And we pulled up my chart and I'm like, oh, yeah, look. I think we're all going to die today. So, you know.
Yeah, I like to think of astrology as a technical philosophy, and I think the technical, we can adhere to the technicals, or we can go more on the philosophical side. And it's like, it's really what line do you want to walk? All right, well, we only have 1 minute. Stormy, where can people find you?
Yes, come and see me, stormiegrace.com. That'll take you to all the little mini portals that I exist in, to include Legatia Academy, which is my business school. And Legatia means legacy in Latin, because I have a Capricorn South Node and I want you to learn to build a beautiful astrological business.
Oh, all right. Well, so they can find you on, I know on Facebook, you're Stormy Beaston.
My personal page is, but my Stormy Grace page has its own page too.
Oh, interesting. Okay, okay. So you've personally been talking to me then.
I have.
That's kind of fun. Talking to the real Stormy. Okay, well, go find Stormy. She's obviously quite brilliant and it will not scare you with culture and astrology. She will be very neutral. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you, Stormy, so much. All
Well,
right.
this was great. It was great to meet you, Stormy. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's so nice to meet you too, man. Nice to meet both of you. I haven't met either of you in person.
Nice. All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye.
Bye.